Welcome to Close Listening. I'm Zach Morgenstern, joined as always by silent co-host Ludwig von B. And the album we're discussing today is Seal, though it is generally called Seal 2, since the artist Seal had 3 years earlier put out another album that he just called Seal. Don't fully get the deal with eponymous album titles, but whatever. I think maybe in the case of Seal, he was still developing his confidence as a musician, so he might have seen this more as a sort of reboot of his career rather than a true second album. But regardless, I sought out this album after seeing an interview with Seal on a big music YouTube channel talking about what a great song Kiss from a Rose is, and I honestly hadn't really thought about it before. And I feel like this was a bit of a sort of psychological wake up to me because what musicians one listens to, what music one even thinks to seek out is determined by so many factors that don't necessarily have anything to do with music. So how did I first know about Seal? Well, only because I saw his name on the front of gossip magazines, 10 or 15 years ago. It was like one of those couples, there was Brad and Angelina, there was Nick and Jessica, there was Seal and Heidi Klum. So I didn't, think of him as a musician. I thought of him as, a celebrity gossip figure. And on top of that, as someone who tends to sort of gravitate towards old classic music, my instinct isn't necessarily to go to someone like Seal, whose career really started in the 1990s. Now, of course, that is a huge overgeneralization and unfair, and obviously all kinds of people can start all kinds of music in all kinds of decades. But the point is, until I saw that
Rick Beato
video, it didn't really occur to me to pay attention to Seal. But I checked him out now. I got this cassette, and man, this is one of the more interesting records I've heard in a while. So this album opens with a song called Bring It On, and it's an interesting mix of different sounds. It sort of reminds me of the mix of textures in a couple of Sting songs, Brand New Day and If I Ever Lose My Faith in You. Seal is playing with a lot of contrast with this one. There's sort of mystical sounding synths, but also some more classic instrumentation, and he's kind of asking profound questions over it in a very nice, powerful voice. The voice has a realness that really contrasts and complements the synths. I don't know, it's sort of like Lionel Richie with a pinch of Bruce Springsteen. Lyric wise, there's also a lot of cool stuff going on. So this album seems to be about exploring the relationship between a vague, imagined ideal and the disappointments of the real world. So a line that stood out to me was, "Take me to that funky place where you and I were born." Now, funky as an adjective tends to describe things like dances and maybe styles, but the idea of wanting to return to your hometown and calling it funky is a kind of funny idea. It's sort of saying like the past was this glorious mystical place that was as wonderful as dancing. Prayer for the Dying similarly feels like a cool mix of sort of different generations of instruments. It kind of reminds me of a mix of like a Phil Collins Disney soundtrack with some Hall & Oates funk brought into there. And again, the lyrics sort of suggest a yearning for a kind of magical alternative as an escape from reality. He sings about playing with fire and not getting burned, this impossible ideal. And then there's a line that goes, "Time is the space between me and you." So this is a song about death. And if taken literally, yeah, time is the space between you and a dead person. The dead person is no longer alive in this timeline. You are still there. But in this sort of mystical mindset, Seal makes this time feel like it is actually a small gap that can be overcome. Track number 3 is called Dreaming in Metaphors. This is a yearning plea for perfect love. Notably, Seal asks for someone who will hold him back, which is not normally something you ask someone to do. Holding someone back is usually unequivocally a bad thing, but it's as if he's saying, I have this wild imaginative mind and I need someone to help ground me in reality. This album has great liner notes. You really get a sense of Seal's mindset while writing this. So one thing he says is people have asked him why he doesn't publish his lyrics in his liner notes. And he says he's not sure, but one theory he has is that his lyrics mean something really specific to him and they're probably not going to connect with other people. So that said, I'm probably going to get this wrong, but since Seal is acknowledging that everyone has their own interpretation, I actually listened to this cassette after rewatching the film Pierrot le Fou by the French New Wave director Jean-Luc Godard. And that film is really about exploring all these things in philosophy and aesthetics and trying to find a higher, richer, better way of living, and ultimately realizing there's no such thing. You can be as smart and visionary as you want, and you still end up in the same world as others. And it feels like that's what's going on with this album. Like Seal is saying, yes, I have these dreams and metaphors, but I realize they are just metaphors, and metaphors are just ways of representing the real world, and the real world is kind of underwhelming. Track number 4 is Don't Cry. This is a comparatively simpler song about comforting someone else that sort of relies on Seal's powerful voice delivering that lyric, Don't cry. Yeah, yet the theme from the earlier songs continues. The lyric goes, When we were young and truth was paramount, we were older then, and we lived a life without any doubt. So, suggesting that there's this mystical other way of living that can be returned to, even though it's just probably looking back at youth through rose-colored glasses. Track number 5 brings in some more interesting instrumentals. It's called Fast Changes, and we hear this little jazz flute at the beginning. And there's this heavy sound of simple, like repetitive chords played by a string orchestra. So the music kind of contrasts heavy against light. Meanwhile, the lyrics go, maybe if my search of mind a little, I'd come across the reason why you're gone. Otherwise, the lyrics to this one are simpler, but again, Seal is sort of contrasting a sort of poetic artist view of the world versus living in the real world. It might be fairly straightforward why this relationship fell apart, but the intellectual in Seal wants to overanalyze this relationship and come up with this mysterious answer. Now, track number 6 is the big hit from this record, and you can see why. It's called Kiss from a Rose. Well, my reaction to a lot of the other songs on this album is they're very interesting because of all the different musical textures that's going on, and sometimes because of the poetic lyrics. This is one where the lyrics are sort of perfectly paced to the music. He doesn't just, take long pauses to let the music production do cool things. He sort of keeps the flow of the song going. And part of the way he keeps that flow going is by using his voice in an instrumental way. I don't know how much progress he'd made by 1994, but when Seal started his musical career, he didn't play instruments. But kind of like Michael Jackson, that didn't stop him from having the vision for composing songs. So Kiss from the Rose, which dates back, I think, to 1987, he originally wrote this song just by sort of humming different melodies into a tape recorder that represented the different instruments. And I guess this translated into a song where the voice always had a prominent role and where the voice was used both as sort of backing instrumentation as well as for delivering lyrics. Track number 7 is called People Asking Why. This one starts with a little bit of a sort of jazz piano flourish. This one offers a bit of a change of substance from the others because it feels less like a song about personal dynamics and more of a protest song. It makes vague allusions to destroying the garden, as in the environment, and it says, I'd give anything to be back home. So one interpretation of this one is certainly is just a vague, why isn't the world nicer kind of catch-all protest song, and back home could just refer to Seal's native England. He makes reference to being in New York in the liner notes. But another possible interpretation, because this album comes out in 1994, is I wonder if Seal is thinking about his mother's homeland of Nigeria, where there was protests against oil extraction, various protesters, including the famous leader Ken Saro-Wiwa, being executed for their protests and being hailed by the United Nations as international heroes for this. So I wonder if Seal particularly had the Ogoniland movement in Nigeria in mind. Track number 8 is called Newborn Stranger. This one continues with the idea of track 7 of wanting to find a way to help others in other parts of the world, but also putting it off because the idea of helping, being a good person who fulfills their duty feels so abstract and so futile. Track number 9 is called If I Could. This is lyrically a simpler and a straightforward I Want You Back song, though one line again suggests that Seal is trying to be in this prophetic kind of mindset. He says, there's no reason for you to lose your mind because I've seen something that's going to change our time. Seal mentions in the liner notes that as part of the inspiration for this record, having an interaction with a palm reader in New York. And he makes clear that he's not a deeply superstitious person. He doesn't believe in this stuff, but also there's part of him that really wants to believe in this stuff. And he talked about one prediction, I think about a friend of his that this palm reader made that came true. And made him happier. So I guess one way one could deal with romantic pain is trying to be prophetic, trying to have some insight about the future that lets you know everything will be okay. And lo and behold, track 10 serves as a kind of continuation to that. It's called I'm Alive. And part of what those lyrics are about is lovers being reunited. So it resolves those themes from the earlier tracks. But it also, revisits a song like Prayer for the Dying because it suggests that part of what it means to be alive is constantly moving towards death. As Bob Dylan said, he who's not busy being born is busy dying. So overall, this was a revelation of an album just because I knew nothing about Seal in advance. The musical production on this album is so cool, and Seal's vocals are the perfect combination of edgy and smooth and strong and beautiful. The one thing I'd say about this album is I feel like it's a bit too coherent, as you can tell these songs, even though he tries to do different things with different instruments like the flute or jazz piano, they were all composed kind of in the same mindset, and they all kind of have a similar melancholy feel. So after the first few songs and after the magic of Kiss from a Rose, things kind of blend into each other. I was also a bit frustrated with the production on If I Could. It's a duet with Joni Mitchell, but unless you're listening closely for that, she's mixed in a way where she almost just sounds like a backup singer. And that's a shame because I think Joni Mitchell was a real inspiration for Seal. He sang for her at a recent tribute concert. Overall, really glad I discovered Seal and Seal 2, and will likely be checking out more of his music in future. I'm Zach Morgenstern. This is Ludwig von Beat. See you next time.